Today we're going to be making chocolate Guinness cupcakes with a Bailey's cream cheese frosting and a whiskey ganache. The whiskey ganache I'll actually put in a separate video because it'll take too long and you don't really need it. So this is the mise en place for the cupcakes. Over here I have 1 cup of Guinness. I'm going to use the extra stout just because the flavor is much better in a cupcake. I have 1 cup of butter. I have half a cup of cocoa powder unsweetened. I have half a cup of semi-sweet chocolate chips. You could use bittersweet. I prefer the bittersweet. Couldn't find it today at the grocery store. I have 1.5 cups of sugar, 1.5 teaspoons of baking soda, half a teaspoon of baking powder, 1 teaspoon of salt, 2 eggs, 2/3 of a cup of heavy or full fat sour cream. You can use plain yogurt if you want. And then I have 2 cups of sifted all-purpose flour. For the frosting over here I have half a cup of butter. I have currently 1 stick of cream cheese frosting, but I'm going to actually add a second one. I have 4 cups of flour, oh my goodness, I have 4, that'd be a horrible icing. I have 4 cups of confectioner's sugar, and then I have right here, I have about 4 tablespoons of Bailey's Irish cream. Alcohol. The alcohol will cook out of this. However, it will not cook out of this because we're not cooking it. So you could do some substitutes. Number 1, you don't need to put alcohol in the frosting at all. Okay, you could substitute this for probably about a teaspoon of vanilla. The other thing you could do if you wanted that flavor, you could actually use one of those Irish cream dairy creamers. That would work just fine. Or you could use espresso, and then you'd have that mocha cream cheese fry. It's actually delicious. All right, I'm going to reposition the camera and we'll get started on the cupcakes. All right, the first thing we are going to do is we're going to take this cup of stout and we're going to put it on a medium heat, and we're actually going to melt the butter into it. However, I'm not going to put that giant block of butter in because that's ridiculous. I'll cut it up into smaller pieces. The one thing I do want to mention, whenever you're baking, make sure your ingredients are at room temperature. It just cooks much better if it's like that. Everything's the same temperature. One ingredient's not cooking at a different speed than the other. All right, so I'm just going to pause this as we let this melt. All right, so the butter is mixed in. What I'm going to do next is add the chocolate chips. And I know I always say don't add wet to dry. I say don't add dry to wet, but in this case I'm going to throw that cocoa in. And we are just going to mix until it's smooth. Oops, making a mess on myself. I'm going to make sure those chocolate chips have melted. Make sure there's no lumps. And then we're going to set it aside, and we're going to have to let this chocolate mixture cool completely. All right, while we're waiting for that chocolate mixture to cool, we are going to whisk together our sugar, baking soda, salt, and baking powder. I'm just going to whisk that together, make sure that it's mixed well and incorporated nicely. There is nothing worse in baking, in my opinion, is when you take a bite of a cupcake or a piece of bread or a cookie and there's a clump of the baking soda that didn't get mixed properly. It tastes absolutely disgusting. All right. Next, what I'm going to do is, again, we're still waiting for that mixture to cool down. we are going to whisk together the eggs and sour cream until it's nice and smooth. Those eggs in there. Just medium speed, and you don't want to overmix. Alright, the mixture is now cool. We're going to pour that chocolate mixture into the eggs and sour cream. Scrape that, make sure you get everything in there. One of the misconceptions about using Guinness in cupcakes, no, your cupcakes are not going to taste like beer. So we're just going to mix that nicely. Alright, that's combined nicely. I've gone ahead and switched my attachments, and now I'm going to add that flour mixture a little bit at a time until it is incorporated. Again, you don't want to pour it all in at once. You want to be careful not to spill. Sometimes it happens. You want to make sure that you don't overmix. And again, make sure you're scraping around the sides and the bottoms just to make sure you're not getting any of that flour mixture stuck to the sides. And that looks like it's about ready. So I am going to get the muffin tins ready. All right, I'm ready to put the muffin liners in, or the cupcake liners in. I do want to talk about muffin liners. Not all of them are created equal. I prefer to use the parchment, unbleached parchment. I find when I'm using the cheaper ones from like the dollar store or these fancy ones, they tend to burn, and if you don't have enough fat or oil in your cupcake, they stick to your cupcake. Okay? You want to make sure that your pan is clean. You want to make sure that it's dry, and then you place your liners in. All right, once your cupcake liners are in, you're going to use a scoop of your choice. I like to use this ice cream scoop here. Make sure it's not dripping. And you want to fill it about 2/3 of the way. Okay, we're going to have to clean that up. All right, I've got them all filled. You don't want to make messes on your tin. You're going to want to weight that up. You've got a couple on there. It'll affect how it cooks, and it'll affect how it rises. I'm just going to weight these up. I wish I was a more delicate scooper, but I am not. I am a messy baker. The recipe says to cook at 350 for about 15 to 18 minutes. However, I know my oven, it'll do better at 325, so I've adjusted the temperature that way. Again, around that 18-minute mark, I'll take a look at them, and then I'll have to watch them more closely. So they will go into the oven now. All right, while we're waiting for the muffins to cook, I'm going to go ahead and start on the frosting. I said I was going to add a second brick of cream cheese. I'm not. I'm going to stick with one. So I'm going to put the cream cheese and the butter into the mixture, or into the mixing bowl, not mixture. Knock this down. I'm used to cooking kids when they're little, so I leave that unplugged until I'm ready to use it. Okay, make sure it's locked, and then we're just gonna cream that together until it's light and fluffy. Alright, I'm gonna go in and add my Baileys. Mix that together. Ooh, that looks really nice. I'm just gonna go, ooh, that's beautiful. All right, that looks nice. What I'm gonna do now is add my confectioner's sugar a little bit at a time, and just like we did before. And then we will incorporate that. Again, you don't want it on full blast, it'll do that. So we're gonna go back to a nice stir. And incorporate it. It's incorporated nicely. Now I'm going to add just a bit more. Normally I wouldn't do it awkward like this, but I'm trying to keep some type of view for the camera. Again, lock that down. Stir, just keep it on low until you get that incorporated. Again, that's looking real nice. Just going to go ahead and scrape down my sides and add the last of it in. Whoops. Turn that off. Again, scrape down my sides, make sure I get all that icing sugar, the confectioner's sugar off the sides. Oops. And now I'm just going to let it whip. Alright, I've let it whip for a little bit. Ooh. Again, I'm just looking for stability and the texture. That looks good to me. I will now put this in my piping bag, and then I'll just put it in the fridge for a little bit until I'm ready to pipe. Alright, this is a piping bag. If you don't have a piping bag, don't worry about it. You can use a freezer bag and just cut the tip off, and you'd be able to make like a circular pattern on it. I'm putting in my star tip. Okay, and in order to fill it, I actually like to use the cup, because my hands don't always work the way I want them to work. And I'll just use my spatula to put it in there. You want to try to avoid doing that. You can add food coloring or food grade coloring to this to change the color of your icing, but with the Baileys cream cheese frosting, I like to leave it this creamy color, and then I'll add some cocoa powder on the top. Alright, my cupcakes have completely cooled. I'm just going to fill them with a whiskey ganache. Some people like to cut a hole in them. I don't do that. I just smash it in there and fill it up. And You do not need to fill your cupcakes. Oop. That one's no good. The only downside to just poking it in there is sometimes you get a blockage with the cake, and then exactly what happened there happens. We got a little bit of a mess on these, but they'll be cleaned up and presentable. Yeah, there we go. That one's perfect. Alright, I'm moving on to the frosting. I like to roll it at the top, and then you're going to start on the outside, squeezing gently. I know when you see the ones on the Instagram videos, they have a ton of frosting on them, but I find they just don't taste very nice. If you have too much frosting, it's just an imbalance of cake to frosting. You want to watch out for air bubbles in your piping bag. One thing I also like about the frosting is it hides the sins of your messy ganache. When I'm piping, I'm not squeezing from this hand, I'm applying pressure from my top hand. Around on the outside. Nice little peak. Ooh, that one's a mess. That's not something I would serve. I'm just using the Wilton Star tip on this today, but I do like using the Russian tip. However, I cannot find it. It's somewhere in my baking cupboard. Ooh. Started squeezing before I needed to, but you can just hide it. As you get down to the bottom of your bag, oh, you can hear that air bubble in there. I just give it another twist. last one. And I'm going to come back through here and just hide that mess. And that was a pretty darn good ratio of icing to, oh, I'm going to taste that. Icing to cake. So what you can do is you can either leave it, you could take a fork and just toss some of the extra ganache on the top. I'm going to just do this right on my counter and clean it up, or you could just dust it lightly with some cocoa powder. Alright, there's a close-up of these. What I ended up doing was just tossing it, grab a little fork, back and forth, get that ganache on the top, and I dusted it. And the other last thing I wanted to show you is because I mentioned that not all liners are the same. Look how beautifully this parchment comes off. It's a beautiful moist cake. I'm gonna break it in half just so you can see the beautiful texture inside. This is obviously not one that's been filled with the ganache. This was my sampler that I put aside. I have spent most of the day fighting off teenagers trying to get get them not to eat the baking, but this is not going to last long. Bon appetit, good luck baking.